how it's possible that in Europe we don't. I have to say, but I'm sorry to not have
In the light of what we know, জিয়া হায়দার রহমানের প্রথম উপন্যাস এরই মধ্যে দেশে বিদেশে সুখ্যাতি লাভ করেছে। বিখ্যাত কিছু পুরস্কারের জন্য বইটি নির্বাচিতও হয়েছে। হয়তো অচিরেই পেয়ে যাবে কোনো সম্মাননা। সম্প্রতি বাংলাদেশে আয়োজিত হে ফেস্টিভ্যালে তিনি অংশগ্রহণ করেন। আমরা তার একটি সাক্ষাৎকার গ্রহণ করি। একাত্তরের পক্ষ থেকে সাক্ষাৎকারটি নেন ব্র্যাক বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের শিক্ষক Ferdous Azim.
It's my great pleasure to be here with Zia Haider Rahman, who has just written this most marvelous novel, In the Light of What We Know. Zia was born in Bangladesh, in Sylhet, but moved to England as a little boy, been educated at Balliol College, Oxford, went on to Munich, Yale universities, trained both as a mathematician and as a human rights lawyer. But now he's amongst us as a writer, as a novelist. So with that, welcome.
Thank you.
Your book covers a wide span of time, though it is kind of based in the early 2000s, but it goes back to the 70s, even the 90s, I think, a lot of the time. What drove you to this theme of writing these topics, these characters? What do you think?
I didn't sit down and think, what shall I write about? What happened was, I want to write about this. A lot of writers say this, that the work, that they are not the master of the work, but the servant. And it's a bit of a cliche, and I'm not entirely convinced that it's well, I certainly wouldn't apply it in its entirety, this idea, but there is a sense, there are various senses in which I did not feel I had sovereignty over the work. And one of those is that I actually felt a compulsion to do it. So there wasn't a sense of choice. For me, the pleasures are very much in the process. This book came into being because I was writing it in a time and place. I was in New York and I was trying to be a comfort to friends who'd lost a child, and there's not much you can do. So I had time on my hands and I started writing this story that I had been thinking about for a while, and someone saw it. Someone was pestering me, what are you doing with your time? And eventually, just to shut this person up, I sent them this chapter. And then a few days later, the person who is now my agent started calling me at 6:30 in the morning. So there was an accident of birth, you know, in the making of this novel. It would have just been something else that I'd written that wasn't for publication, but which would have rewarded me psychically, simply in the writing. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, but I was just thinking of your next novel.
Yes.
Do you think you will be as driven and as taken over by the story?
Well, yeah.
I just as a non-writer, I wonder if it happens with every novel.
Yeah. Well, I had that question before I finished this novel. It occurred to me as a question. But actually, just before I finished this novel, I found myself, I didn't choose to, but I found myself thinking about the next one and the characters. I had an idea already, but I pushed it to one side. And since then I have been thinking and making notes and working on the second novel, and now it is vivified. It has a presence in my imagination. The character, well, one of the main characters is virtually, is sufficiently animated in my mind for me to miss not being with that character.
Most readers here seem to be intrigued by this dual narrative technique and the dual character, one as the alter ego of the other, or as the split personality, schizophrenic as you were calling it. Well, how do you look at it, and why have you used this technique?
The interesting thing about that description, dual and schizophrenic, is not so much that the sense of difference, but the sense that there must be sufficient similarity in order to justify describing it as duality, right? That's always the case with all duality and schizophrenia, to use a word, a medical word, but in a colloquial way. And that's important here because these guys, these two chaps, the narrator and Zafar, the other principal character in the novel, they are ostensibly similar. They are both from South Asia, in a broader sense. One's from Pakistan, one's from Bangladesh. They both live in the West, and they both studied mathematics. They both went to Oxford. So they have very many similarities, and yet they are very different in terms, well, they have very different perspective on life. They are also very different in terms of class. And for me, you know, I have a very poor background. I have a, you know, my father was a waiter and a bus conductor in London. My mother was a seamstress. But I came out of that background and moved into other social environments and professional environments, which some would say put me in a different class altogether as well, a different status. And I've always been very uncomfortable about that. V.S. Naipaul has had the same experience. You know, it is the experience not of all immigrants. It's fascinating. It's not the experience of immigrants who come from the elites in one country, especially the super elites, like the narrator, who was actually, even though he's Pakistani, he was born in Princeton in America. His father is an Oxford physicist. His grandparents are industrialists and diplomats and very wealthy people. So for them, moving around the world doesn't have the dislocation that it has for people who have no expectation of moving but are forced to move by circumstance, who do not see themselves as citizens of the world but tied to the land. So I was keen to explore that schism within my own self, but also the relationship of people who are divided by class. We talk a lot about differences because of ethnicity or conspicuous cultural terms, but I see less and less fiction that adequately, in my view, adequately engages questions of class or adequately takes on power and unfairness and class.
There is a South Asian novel. I know that category doesn't really fit it, but it is a South Asian novel, let's say, with India hardly featuring in it. That the characters should be Bangladeshi and Pakistani, in a way talks about another vision of India, of the subcontinent that had emerged. Is there any of that informing the choice of character or not?
Is there any
Muslim affinity and things being drawn?
No. I never felt I ought to include India. I never felt that there would only be sufficient similarity between, you know, the Muslim dimension actually does feature from time to time. There are details, but it features because it shows you that there is, it brings out similarities between the characters, between their respective parents. There are various scenes where you can see that they are, even though they're both Muslim, they have very different relationship with Islam, very different. The experience of people like me, of meeting other South Asians who have also grown up, most of them born overseas in the UK or America. Our experience of encountering Pakistanis or Indians is very different, very, very different from the experience of South Asians encountering other South Asians within South Asia. I do not have, it's not a difficult encounter. It's not an encounter fraught with as much with the weight of history.
How would you categorize yourself as a writer, and in what category would you put yourself? Post-colonial, right. Post-modern. Where do you see yourself in this?
But in terms of categories, I don't need to define. It doesn't help me in the course of writing. It's not yeah, it's not relevant to the process of writing, and that's where the pleasure is. You can't write a novel for years, 550 pages, if you don't, if you're not getting enough out of the mere process. And so, as a writer, you're concerned about things. You're concerned about what it is that can help you write. What do you need? What resources, intellectual or in terms of skill and craft, that you need to, or what you need to work on in order to write better. But I really don't need to know if I'm a postmodern novelist or not, or a Bangladeshi novelist or not.
The problem is you're in Bangladesh, and we're very good at embracing people.
Yes.
So we're dying to embrace you into our fold, and hence we are, pulling you in. Son of the soil.
I'm not prone to saying things just to please people, and in fact, I think I just can't live like that. I have to tell the truth, about what I feel about writing and about my understanding of what kind of person and writer I am, and I am Bangladeshi, but I'm also British. I'm also, I feel myself American. I'm happy in many other parts of the world. Because of the way I have lived, it is inevitable that I don't have a simple attitude to belonging. I have a complexity, and it's not necessarily a happy one. I mean, sometimes I wish that there was some stretch of the earth to which I felt a sort of binding attachment. Yeah, I think the picture is more complicated. There's no doubt that Bangladesh is emotionally, it touches a very deep place. There's no place in the world that can, there are certain parts of me that, belong to Bangladesh, belong rather to a gram in northeastern Bangladesh, and that won't ever change. I'm delighted if people feel a kinship with me because of the book, then I'm delighted. I feel a kinship with the people of Bangladesh.
Your novel, In the Light of What We Know, deals a lot with international politics, set in Afghanistan, even the Bangladesh chapters with corruption and things in there. So how do you see the state of the world and international, one of the, I think it was Joyce Carol Oates who said human relationships and international relations. So how do you see that, these very fraught and conflict-ridden times that we live in, and how that will affect human existence and human relations?
Wow, that's a big question. That's a massive, yeah. I'm not an optimist. I'm not when it comes to politics and international relations, and I find it very difficult to be an optimist. I don't see anything good really coming out in the short term, possibly even in the long term. I don't believe that we as a species really progress ultimately. The things that drive us progress in a moral sense. I don't think each generation inherits any moral advance of the previous generation. Our DNA does not pass on moral learning, and the clock is restarted with every generation. So we try to become better by organizing our institutions in such a way that makes it harder for people to behave badly. We try to arrange the world in such a way that the incentives that they deliver peace, incidentally, but there's scant evidence that actually human beings do get better. Venality seems to be the timber of humanity is, we seem to be very bad at root. And we had the Holocaust in the middle of the 20th century in Europe, and people thought this could never happen again. But then we've had genocides over and over again, even in Europe.
With that, I want to come to your love of the US that is displayed in the book.
Right.
How can you be so positive about the US in this post 9/11 world?
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question. I think there's a category mistake made. The mistake is made every time someone says America is this. So the America I love and know is, there are two aspects to it. One is real and the other is imaginary. The real America that I love is an America that is found in the Northeast, in California, in Chicago, in major urban centers.
Of Washington, D.C.?
Well, Washington, D.C. is a peculiar place. It's a very bizarre place. It's mad. But it's certainly different from the America that you might see on television when you see people saying that Obama is not a true American, he's actually a Kenyan, this sort of thing, or saying that we should bomb everybody in the Middle East, and this sort of nonsense. That's not all of America. That's not. So that's the imaginary America is the America of certain ideals, and I think the American people keep going back to those, and that's wonderful. I don't feel that in European countries that there is a sense of returning to ideas, trying to live up to a great ideal. There's no, and they fail, but, I'm a pessimist when it comes to the future of civilizations. I think I am a pessimist, and because I am a pessimist, I need to keep company with optimists.
Who are your immediate inspirations, of living authors?
I don't know who my literary influences are any more than I can tell you which meals I've had in my life that have been particularly nourishing for my body. Okay. I sometimes think that actually bad writing is really useful to read for the purpose of developing one's craft, and that's because good writing, when writing is perfect, I should say, one of the features that makes it perfect is that its anatomy is invisible. One thing, it's a magic trick where you absolutely have no idea what's going on, how it worked, yeah? But when you can see the edge of the card here, or the tip of the rabbit's ear, that's when you can begin to see how the trick works. But there are certainly writers I love. And they are, I don't know if they're contemporary writers. Both of them have stopped writing as far as I can tell. V.S. Naipaul, Philip Roth. But the great writers, here's the amazing thing, you can read them again and again, and you will find more and more. And I love literature that does that. I'm one of these people who will read a book again and again. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Pretty much every time I fall sick, I read The Great Gatsby. It's my go-to book whenever I fall sick. I read The Great Gatsby.
Do you ever think of coming back to Bangladesh?
I do. I mean, there are things I can imagine myself doing that don't necessarily mean I'm here all the time. I could be here 3 months out of every year, or even 6 months out of the year. Remember, I'm a writer and a novelist, and I do need a chunk of time to work on a novel, so I could do that here, for instance. But yeah, no, I do. There are things I have ideas about things I could do, and I would enjoy doing.
Thank you, Zia, for this. I think it was a very engaged and engaging conversation that we've had. And thank you to Ekattor Television for giving this time, and I hope the viewers enjoy watching this. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.